Hello and welcome to the 8-man hard mode Titan 6 boss fight guide. My name's Hayete, and today I'll be covering everything you need to know to successfully complete the second fight in the Scum and Villainy operation. For this encounter, we suggest you bring a standard composition of 2 tanks, 4 DPS, and 2 healers. Any class composition will be more than capable of beating this fight. In the event you have a low DPS concern, this fight can be solo tanked. I'll explain later during strategy explanation exactly how to do that. Okay, so let me quickly go over the DPS requirements for this fight. Titan 6 is very straightforward, and really just involves the boss itself and some simple adds. The fight has an enrage time of 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Here you'll see the individual health of each enemy in this encounter, followed by a multiplier for the amount present within the 440-second enrage time. The adjusted DPS total has been brought down by 3,000 DPS to account for a 1,500 DPS total per tank. More than likely your tank's DPS will be higher than this, so this represents a bare minimum contribution from your tanks and does not account for any DPS contributed by your healers. Overall, the DPS requirement for this fight is fairly low when evaluated against current class and spec standings within 4.0. Before I get into strategy explanation, let me take a moment and go over the mechanics for the fight, so you'll have a good idea of what things do and look like, then I'll discuss how to put it all together. Number 1. Lots of missiles. This is a 6-second channel conducted by Titan 6 that targets all raid members. Each missile impact does damage to the player and any other player standing within 4 meters of the targeted player. Number 2. Airstrike. This is a 2-second channel by Titan 6 that when complete applies a red circle directly under each raid member. Shortly after, the target area will be struck, causing high damage to anyone standing in the telegraph. Each player will receive 2 of these red circles. Number 3. Buried. Buried is a 20-second debuff applied to the boss's current target. This debuff effectively stuns the player, leaving them unable to act, and additionally applies a 200% damage increase to all attacks. This ability can be broken through class CC breaks. Number 4. Titan Probes. Titan Probes represent the only other enemy in this encounter. These adds attack with an ability called Targeted Laser, which does very minimal damage. Number 5. Huge Grenade. This is a 6-second debuff applied by Titan 6 to his current target. This debuff is additionally accompanied by a huge red circle telegraph centered around the affected player. When the debuff expires, the affected player and any other players inside the radius of the telegraph will receive a large amount of damage. Number 6. Launch. Launch is a 3-second channel initiated by Titan 6. At the conclusion of this channel, a 360-degree wave of energy will be released, expanding throughout the entire arena. Unmitigated, launch can do a considerable amount of damage. Number 7. Flame Burst. This is a 360-degree damaging attack that affects any player standing within the radius of the flame circle. Number 8. Grapple. Grapple is a raid-wide pull-in that occurs by Titan 6 every 20 seconds during the final phase of the encounter. Alright, so now that you have at least a foundational understanding of what mechanics you'll be facing, let me show you how to use all of that information to formulate a strategy for beating the encounter. First, let's discuss positioning. Positioning for this encounter is pretty straightforward. You'll want to position tanks and melee DPS in such a way that they are at least 4 meters apart from one another. So maybe something like this. For ranged DPS and healers, you'll want to do about the same thing. So maybe, for example, something like this. This is how you'll initiate the fight. 15 seconds after the fight is initiated, Titan 6 will apply the buried debuff to his current target. This should be your tank. As this happens, ensure the affected tank immediately uses their class CC break to remove the stun and 200% damage taken increase and immediately taunt the boss back. Immediately after this, he'll start channeling lots of missiles. This mechanic is the main reason you'll want to keep some distance between group members. You do not want to take your own damage and someone else's by standing too close. A way you can check yourself on this is to look for the impact crater that animates as missiles hit your location. If you're standing in someone else's crater, or someone else in yours, make sure to make adjustments accordingly. Shortly after the conclusion of lots of missiles, Titan 6 will begin channeling airstrike. There are two ways to handle this mechanic. The first is the most basic strategy. As a red circle is placed under your feet, move out of it just far enough to remain unhit. The second is my preferred method, but does require fast reaction time, practice, and a decent internet connection. As the first circle is laid down, move your character one step in any direction. The next circle will then be laid down, and immediately as this happens, you move out towards the direction you initially moved. This essentially stacks the circles, saving you room to avoid damage. The reason behind taking a step in a general direction is so that you can visually see the new circle's radius as it drops. You'll then move out of both circles in the same direction to minimize the distance you need to move to be clear from any possible damage. Immediately after airstrike, 2 Titan probes will spawn. Make sure your tanks pick these up. Shortly thereafter, Titan 6 will apply the huge grenade mechanic to his current target, which should be your tank. You'll want to move this away from your group as soon as possible. I'll explain shortly our recommendation for where to move these two here momentarily. As the grenade goes out, the off tank should immediately taunt Titan 6. This person will then remain the active tank until the next huge grenade. As the grenade is about to expire, I highly suggest you use a defensive cooldown to help mitigate the damage. Shortly after the huge grenade mechanic, Titan 6 will channel lots of missiles a second time. Respond to this the same as before. Immediately following the second lots of missiles, Titan 6 will start to cast for the launch mechanic, and at its conclusion, will rocket into the air and ascend out of the arena. So at some point throughout this guide, I hope you've asked yourself, what the hell are all these rocks around the room for? Well, those exist for the launch mechanic. As launch starts to cast, small telegraphs will form on each rock in the arena. To avoid the damage from launch, you need to place yourself into one of these telegraphs. Be sure not to double up on a rock, as the second person will push the first person out from behind cover and leave them vulnerable to damage. It's also worth noting that you do not need to be behind the rock as launch completes, only behind a rock before the damage reaches you. Think of launch as a tidal wave. Make sure you're behind cover before it crashes into you. Another method for dealing with launch revolves around certain class and spec abilities. For example, Sentinels, Marauders, Guardians, and Juggernauts can Blade Blitz or Mad Dash just as the wave is about to hit them, to completely mitigate all damage. This is highly useful for dealing with remaining Titan probes or just repositioning quicker in preparation for the boss's descent. There are a few other classes and specs, specific abilities that can be used to negate the use of rocks as cover. As launch concludes, 6 Titan probes will spawn, and Titan 6 will return to the arena. Have all raid members immediately move to the boss. Since Titan probes will be aggroed to multiple people, having all raid members group up on the boss will help to pull all the adds together. As the adds are gathered next to the boss, have the current tank AoE taunt them, and DPS should AoE them down immediately. As soon as the adds are defeated, ensure your group spreads back out, as lots of missiles will follow very soon after the adds are defeated. If DPS is low or too slow to take care of the adds, you may have adds alive as lots of missiles happens. If this is the case, make sure you prioritize spreading out over grouping on the boss. In either case, as the lots of missiles starts, this signals the beginning of the next cycle. So from this point, you'll rinse and repeat these mechanics until phase 2. I want to quickly show you some images to explain the various locations Titan 6 will move to, as well as where your tank should run the huge grenade. This is of course our recommendation, and there are other strategies that exist for moving the huge grenade throughout the encounter. This, however, is our preferred method. Both these images will be linked in the description section of this guide for your reference. So phase 2 starts as Titan 6 reaches 19%. As phase 2 initiates, the boss reconfigures into a tank-like configuration and starts his flame burst mechanic. As this starts, ensure that melee DPS and tanks stand between the boss itself and the flame animations. Ranged DPS should take up positions either on the outside of the flame circle or the gaps that exist on the radius of the flame circle. During this phase, missiles will be constantly hitting all raid members. This means you still need to maintain your spacing in close proximity to other players. Every 20 seconds, Titan 6 will grapple all raid members beyond melee range. This means ranged players and healers will more than likely be pulled into the flames and take flame burst damage. Quickly reposition and go back to doing your role. Healers should be sure to focus on keeping DPS players alive, and of course themselves. Tanks should be the last on the healing priority. Any raid buffs or adrenals available should be used here. So real quick, I want to go over some additional information for the fight. First, the timing of the enrage aligns to position 6 from the movement image. Shortly after the boss reaches this position, he will enrage. Second, Phase 2 does not stop the enrage, and enrage in Phase 2 is much more brutal than Phase 1. Lastly, I want to explain how to single tank this fight if you need to. To do this comfortably, you'll need a taunt-capable DPS. With that, there are 2 things you'll need to do. First, 12 seconds into the fight, the taunt-capable DPS will need to taunt the boss. Since the buried mechanic happens at 15 seconds, this will ensure your DPS player gets the debuff. As soon as this happens, the tank can then taunt the boss back. Second, as huge grenade goes out, you'll need the taunt-capable DPS to pick up the boss, and hold the boss until the tank is finished with the huge grenade. Healers, this means you'll need to focus heals on this player, and the DPS players should ensure that they use some kind of defensive cooldown to help. Furthermore, if your taunt-capable DPS happens to be a Guardian or a Juggernaut, you can reverse this order, and have the taunt-capable DPS pick up the huge grenade, and then they can Blade Blitz or Mad Dash through it and receive no damage, while your tank stays on the boss. Doing this will allow you to essentially single tank the encounter. So that's the fight, guys. This fight is really straightforward. Make sure you keep your distance from other players and do not get caught up in launch, and you should have no problem defeating this boss. As always, if you like this video, please show your support and give it a like. We love to hear your feedback, and that is a great way for us to get an idea of how well these guides are being received by the community. If you enjoyed the guide, consider hitting the subscribe button, so you'll be the first to know of new guides and content as they're released. If you have any suggestions, comments, or think of something I may have missed, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy the fight.
Hostiles detected. Initiate defense sequence 1. Initiate defense sequence 2. I am Titan 6. All other models are inferior. Initiate defense sequence 2. Initiate defense sequence 3. Initiate defense sequence 5. defense sequence 2. Initiate defense sequence 2. Initiate defense sequence 3. Initiate defense sequence 5. Initiate defense sequence 2. Reactor leak detected. Attempting to compensate. Power levels at 0. Systems shutting down.